you remember this scene, then you probably remember the big splash High School of the Dead made when its anime debuted in the early 2010s. Coinciding with the resurgence of zombies in pop culture, its ride on the trend helped boost it among anime viewers at the time. A solid action comedy with the right amount of blood, guts, and just a smidgen of fan service to make the immediate impact that it did. But before we talk about whatever happened to the series, let's get to how it got its start. The manga was written by Daisuke Sato and illustrated by Shoji Sato, no relation. It made its debut in Shonen Manga magazine Monthly Dragon Age on August 9, 2006. It was each creator's first big success and helped establish their names in the manga scene. The story begins with a cold open as we witness Takashi, Hisashi, and Rei fighting off a horde of zombies on the roof of Fujimi Academy. They manage to call the police after a moment of respite, but to their dismay, they're forwarded to an automated message as the dispatch line has been overwhelmed with calls. How did this chaos erupt so quickly? Takashi makes his way up to the roof, where he wallows in self-pity over being unable to be with the girl of his dreams, Rei Miyamoto, who is dating his best friend Hisashi. As he glances down to the gate, he notices two school staff members confront an intruder trying to force their way through the entrance. The intruder then bites off a chunk of one of the teacher's arms and he bleeds out. As the other staff try to render aid to him, he resurrects and rips out the throat of another teacher. As Takashi watches the chaos unfold, he sprints over to Rei's classroom because all he can think about is saving her from whatever comes next. He tries to explain to her what's going on, but she's having none of it. So he does the only logical thing he can do in this kind of situation. Hisashi, meanwhile, watches all this happen right in front of him and gives hardly any reaction to Takashi physically assaulting his girlfriend. Anyway, they both decide to leave with Takashi to figure out what's going on. They run into a zombified teacher and Hisashi tries to restrain him, but he underestimates the raw power of these monsters as it quickly rotates 180 degrees and bites into his arm. Takashi manages to bash its brains in. They then get up to the roof where they see the ruins of the city left in the wake of this epidemic. It's here where they also establish the not using the Z word trope and opt to call them. Hisashi states that simply calling them zombies seems too fictional and lessens the gravity of the situation. Honestly, I've always hated this trope. Everybody knows what it's supposed to be. Just call it a zombie. Anyway, Hisashi starts to feel the effects of the virus spreading. He begs Takashi to put an end to him so that he doesn't become a zombie. As they say their goodbyes, Rei refuses to believe that he'll turn. But once he does, Takashi bludgeons his old friend and finally puts him to rest. He and Rei embrace each other in the aftermath as he wonders what they're supposed to do next. In the next chapter, we're introduced to the school nurse, Shizuka, a stereotypical ditzy blonde with the tiggest of biddies. She's mostly utilized for comic relief. Here we see a student sacrifice himself to a horde of zombies for her, and all she does is stand there and wonder what his name is. Just then, Psycho, the captain of the kendo club, comes in and fights the zombies off. A samurai-like character with her stoicism and kendo skills, she mercifully puts down the student to prevent him from turning. Switching over to students Takagi, an arrogant know-it-all, and Hirano, a nerdy gun nut whose character is modeled and named after Hellsing creator Kota Hirano. They show their craftiness by using a gas-powered nail gun to mow down the infestation of zombies. Back to Rei and Takashi, Rei is able to reach her father, a police officer, on Takashi's phone. She's unable to talk to him, however, due to the failing cell service. He manages to tell her to get to the city as fast as she can before the call abruptly drops. Takashi reassures Rei as she breaks down in tears and suggests that they should try to find some more survivors and make their way home. Takagi, meanwhile, decides to run a quick experiment on their new undead foes. She's able to observe that the zombies are incapable of sight, using only their sense of sound to explore their surroundings. All 6 of the characters finally run into each other, and they make their way to the faculty room, where the keys to the buses are located. There, they turn on the TV and watch the news, coming to the realization that this virus has now ravaged the world and is causing the collapse of society as they know it. On their way out of the school, they run into a couple more survivors. They're then blocked off by the zombies roaming the halls. Takashi decides to volunteer to put Takagi's sound theory to the test. After he quietly weaves through the zombies without getting their attention, the rest of the group follows him. But just as they're almost out of harm's way, one of the survivors they picked up accidentally alerts all the zombies with an echoing clang sound. He ends up getting devoured, and his friend decides to stay back and share his fate as the rest of the group goes towards the bus. As they're about to leave, they spot one of the teachers, Shido, trailed by a few students, trying to make it onto the bus as well. Rei is adamant on not letting Shido on the bus, but Takashi decides to wait so they can board. Rei's disgust for Shido isn't unwarranted though, as we see him kick a student in the face and leave him for dead after he's unable to walk due to twisting his ankle. Shido declares him too weak to live in this new world. Once they leave on the bus, Shido quickly decides to position himself to be in charge. After he models himself like a cult leader, Rei can't handle it any longer and gets off the bus with Takashi chasing after her. Suddenly, a runaway bus comes racing down the freeway, flips over, and combusts into flames, separating the two from the rest of the group. Takashi yells out to Saiko to meet back up at the police station. Rei and Takashi steal a motorcycle off an undead rider and make their way to the city. As they ride through the ruins of the zombies' wrath, they spot a destroyed police car with a dead officer inside. Takashi snags the gun off the corpse, and they head to a gas station to fuel back up. Takashi goes in there to raid the register for money to use at the pump. Once he walks back outside though, he finds that Rei is being held hostage by a large man that threatens to kill her if he doesn't fill the bike back up. Once Takashi does this, he quickly pulls out his gun and shoots him point blank in the shoulder. The man's subsequent cries of pain attract a horde of zombies. He screams for help, but his pleas fall on deaf ears as Rei and Takashi leave him to be eaten alive. Takashi reflects on how quickly they've lost their humanity. The next chapter briefly opens up at an airport, with a plane trying to fly off passengers to safety. Here we're introduced to Minami, an SAT sniper that shoots down some zombies to allow the plane to safely take off. We then shift back to the bus, where Shido continues growing his small cult base of students that are willing to drink his Kool-Aid. Takagi ponders on where their ideal safe haven will be, as any surviving communities will be wary of bringing anybody new in. Meanwhile, Rei and Takashi narrowly escape some rioters and looters and make it to the bridge that goes into the city. They see that the police have blocked off the entrance, so they decide to make their way to the other bridge down the river. On the bus, they too have been blocked off, and Saiko, Shizuka, Hirano, and Takagi decide to hop out of the bus instead. Shido, however, refuses to let Shizuka leave, seeing her as too valuable to lose since she's a nurse. He quickly relents when Hirano grazes his face with a nail gun. Once off the bus, the 6 are reunited after Rei and Takashi spot them. Shizuka mentions that she has the keys to her best friend's apartment, so the group decides to head over there for the night. While the girls wash up in an incredibly lewd scene that I definitely cannot show here, Hirano and Takashi realize that whoever Shizuka's friend is no ordinary person. Not only do they have a Humvee parked in their driveway, but they also have a stash of illegal guns in their safe. Here, Hirano reveals that his immense knowledge of firearms comes from his time in America, where he was taught by a Blackwater instructor. They turn on the TV and witness hell starting to break loose at one of the blockades. Desperate to restore order and being unable to hear from higher headquarters, the officers start gunning down the protesters. The boys are then interrupted by Shizuka and Rei, who are both heavily intoxicated after trying to drown their troubles away in alcohol. Once Takashi puts Shizuka to bed, he runs into Saiko, who is wearing almost nothing but an apron since she says none of the clothes that they were around fit her. Rei then calls out to Takashi, and during their conversation, Rei mentions Hisashi, which leads Takashi to have an angry outburst. After calming down, the two share a kiss off panel. Outside, the zombies are running amok on the survivors, and Psycho suggests that they can't afford to shelter any of them. As Takashi and Hirono watch helplessly outside, they see a little girl named Alice running house to house with her father, begging for someone to let them in. A door they've been pounding on finally opens up, and the people in there fatally stab Alice's father and leave her out to be eaten by the horde. Unable to bear it any longer, a shot rings out from Hirono's rifle as he attempts to clear out the zombies near the girl. Takashi goes out there to save Alice, as well as a stray dog that's joined her side. Once he gets a hold of them, the rest of the crew get in the Humvee to save them, and they ride off to find a way inside the city. In America, the president's plane has been overridden by zombies. He and his top general have already been bitten, and they contemplate their next move before they lose all sense of themselves. The general continues to push the president to launch nuclear strikes against all of their enemies before they take advantage of the disarray. Back in Japan, our main cast manages to utilize the Humvee to traverse through the river and make it into the city. However, after they get in there, they reach a dead end and get swarmed by the undead horde. Rei falls off the Humvee and is immobilized. Takashi decides to do the most logical thing he can think of and grabs the rifle strapped to her to mount it on her bosom and use it as a firing position to fight back against the zombies. As the group gets overwhelmed, a group of masked rescuers come and blow the monsters away. One of their saviors removes their mask, and they're revealed to be Takagi's mother. Her and Takagi share a heartfelt reunion as they then tread on to safety to the Takagi compound. Takagi's parents have managed to maintain a small stronghold on their mansion, where they house survivors from the neighborhood. Her father's a right-wing ultranationalist, while her mother's a successful trader that amassed the family's wealth. Takagi becomes increasingly erratic as she feels her skills do nothing to the survival of their group. They all then watch outside as Takagi's father arrives and makes a spectacle of beheading the resurrected corpse of his best friend. While intending to show his unwavering resolve, this causes dissension among the survivors, as some of them believe the potential of finding a cure for the zombies, believing them to still be human. Meanwhile, Hirono is refusing to turn in any of his guns. After Takagi and the rest of his friends stick up for him, Takagi's father relents and allows him to keep them, admiring his boldness. We then see that one of Shido's students has infiltrated the compound and informs Shido over the phone that he believes they'll be allowed in. On Shido's bus, one of the students still retains his senses and hasn't bought into Shido's sex-crazed cult. He expresses that he simply wants to find his family. The rest of the group decide to toss him out and leave him to be eaten. Back on the compound, Takagi's father decides to give Saiko an ancient sword since he has such high respect for his former master, her father. He also suggests to Saiko that they should consider making Takashi the leader of their small group, saying that despite the self-doubt he holds for himself, he shows great potential. We're then taken underwater in a US military submarine. The sailors there have just received their orders and launch a ballistic missile at North Korea and China. We check back in on Minami, where her and her partner, Tajimi, are clearing through zombies at the airport. Unfortunately, Tajimi gets bitten in the calf and gives a tearful goodbye to Minami before pulling his grenade and ending his life with a bang. Once Minami gets back to the terminal, she manages to reach her friend Shizuka over the phone. Here it's revealed that the apartment Shizuka and the teens were staying at was Minami's. Their conversation is cut short, however, as the ballistic missiles shot off earlier create an EMP that knocks off all electronic devices. In the next chapter, we briefly see some astronauts stranded on the International Space Station, witnessing Russia and China firing missiles of their own. At the compound, Takashi goes to Takagi's father and explains that he and Hirono are going to set off and find the rest of their family members and bring them back. Takagi's father agrees with his plan and gives them a buggy to get around easier. Saiko insists on coming along with them, but before they head out, they see Shido's bus arrive at the entrance. Here we get a quick backstory on Shido. He's the son of an influential politician who cheated on his mother and drove her to drink herself to death. As a favor to his father, he held Rei back a year to get her father off the corruption trail of Shido's father. Rei then decides to run up to Shido and threaten to shoot him on the spot. Takagi's father, being a reasonable man, gives Rei permission to do so if she pleases. Rei, however, chooses not to, claiming that he's not worth the effort. Takagi's father forces Shido and his students to leave, seeing through the facade that they try to put up. Shizuka is able to reach Minami by phone. They have the conversation we saw in the last chapter. When the EMP goes off, Shido's unable to control his bus, and it crashes through the barricade, allowing the dead to pour in. The compound quickly gets overrun, and Takagi's parents decide to stay back to give the teens a chance to escape on the buggy, which was unaffected by the EMP. On the road, they realize that the buggy is making too much noise. Saiko and Takashi decide to split off on the buggy to distract the zombies, while the rest of the group will meet back up with them later on foot. As the two get attacked by a horde, Saiko freezes up, and they're forced to hide out in a house for the night. There, Saiko reveals that the reason she froze was because she has a sadistic side of her that revels in the violence and that makes her feel ashamed. The next morning she freezes up again, but then Takashi, let's say, physically encourages and reassures her to let that side out. They make their way to a shopping mall where the rest of the group waits for them. Here we meet Shimida, who we're gonna have a big talk about later, and Asami, a junior police officer who is one of the only adult female characters without a ginormous rack, and the de facto leader at the mall while she waits for her senior officer, Matsushima, to return. The teens are weary of the group's stability due to the dwindling resources they're now faced with, and because of the loss of power, so they start devising an exit plan if things go sour. Rei gets increasingly hostile towards Takashi as she sees the growing connection between him and Saiko. The other survivors in the mall begin turning on Asami, so Hirano gives her a gun to restore her authority. As they realize that Shizuka is missing, they find her about to be violated by Shimida. Asami points her gun at him and threatens to shoot, but she is too paralyzed by fear to be able to pull the trigger. Thankfully, Hirano sneaks up from behind and chokes Shimida out, while Takashi restrains him. Alright, so first thing here, after this happens, they just let this guy stay in the group. You'll see him pop up again later, because the kind of crime he attempted to commit is somehow forgivable in the author's eyes. He should have at least been kicked out of the mall by the group and left to fend for himself. Anyway, after this, Asami starts to have feelings for Hirano, who, by the way, she is an adult woman and he is an underage teenager. The teens decide to scavenge around the mall to see what they can use. Hirano is approached by Asami on the roof, where he reciprocates her feelings towards him. They're then interrupted by one of the mall survivors, who says that the old lady in the mall is in dire need of a blood transfusion. A few of them decide to go to the clinic nearby to find any blood that hasn't expired yet, but some question the futility of the mission, since she'll need a transfusion every week. They manage to find a fresh bag of blood, but are then overrun by an incoming horde. Takashi blasts a hole through the ceiling for them to escape, but as they go through, one of the mall survivors has his legs devoured when he only makes it halfway through. He begs for them to shoot him to end his misery, and Asami first asks what his name is so that they can always remember him. He smiles and says his name is Tamaru. This time, Asami doesn't hesitate to muster up the courage to do what needs to be done. Once they're back at the mall, the three of them stress over the failure of losing Tamaru. The rest of the girls worry about the pressure being put on Takashi and Hirano. Saiko goes to comfort Takashi, while Rei tries to jealously do the same. Asami tries to convince Hirano to stay, but he tells her that he simply can't abandon his friends. Asami tells him that she understands and that she expected that to be his answer. She looks outside. To her horror, sees the zombified corpse of Matsushima. Falling into despair, she gives up hope on their survival, while some of the other mall survivors overhear what has happened. The teens decide to get going to find Rei and Takashi's families. Hirano tries to convince Asami to go with them, but she angrily rebukes him, stating that she should only rely on herself from now on. The rest of the mall survivors fall into dissension again, as they now lost their hope on the police coming to rescue them. One of them loses his mind and runs out of one of the exits to take down as many zombies as he can, leaving the door wide open. Up on the roof, Asami sulks and is then reassured by the old couple that she has helped the group to the best of her ability. Hirano comes up and pleads one more time to Asami to come with them, which she gleefully agrees to. As they leave together, the old couple reflect on the youth they once had. They decide to jump off the building together and end their lives, which totally caught me off guard the first time reading it, because you just see them standing in one panel, and in the next one all you see left are their shoes on the freaking roof. So Tamaru pretty much died for nothing. R.I.P. dude. Sucks to suck. The next chapter opens up with some of the adult survivors cornered on the roof as they're overrun by zombies. A helicopter then flies overhead with SDF soldiers blowing away the zombies and rescuing them. When asked if there are any other survivors, the adults mention that the teens already made their escape. We're then taken back several hours earlier to show how they did it. They, Shimida, and Asami split off from the rest of the adults after the zombies pour in through the open emergency exit. Once outside, they spot the mall survivor that left the door open. Asami and Shimida decide to go and try to rescue him. And even though this is somehow supposed to be Shimida's heroic moment of redemption, I really couldn't care less about this character at this point. Shimida allows himself to get eaten alive to let the mall survivor escape. And thank God he is finally gone. I could not stand to keep looking at him. What a freak. Unfortunately for Asami, she's just fired her last bullet, and the zombies are closing in on her. With tears in her eyes, she screams to Hirano to not let her turn into one of them. Hirano then picks up his gun, aims down his scope on her, and does the hardest thing he's had to do at this point. In the following chapter, we see how badly the PTSD from Asami's death has affected Hirano. He carelessly shoots down any zombie he sees on the street, which causes the rest of the group to feel weary of his well-being. Takashi fears that if Hirano gets himself killed, it'll just lead to a domino effect that'll fracture the whole group. They hear gunshots in the distance, but as they make their way to the police station, Hirano stops in his tracks and tells them to go on without him, declaring he's just done with it all. Fed up at this point, Shizuka goes up to him and screams some sense back into him. With this confrontation, Hirano manages to find that spark to keep moving forward. Having finally made it to the police station, to their dismay, it looks completely abandoned. They navigate through the building, clearing out any zombies they find in hope of finding any remaining weapons the police left behind. However, once they make it to the safe, all the weapons are already gone. Hirano mentions that they should check the evidence room in case there's any confiscated illegal guns in there. They're able to snag some weapons off the zombified officers and a stash of guns in the evidence room. Takagi asks Rei where the communications room is to see if there's anything there that withstood the EMP. We then see a lone computer screen is still lit up in the dark room. The system is displaying the J Alert emergency broadcast. The message states that in 2 days, the SDF will evacuate any remaining survivors at Shitoko Elementary School, the school where Takashi's mom works. Before they leave, they check Rei's father's office to see if there's any hint of his fate. Rei is overcome with glee as she sees a note written on the board in his handwriting, directing all survivors to go to Shintoku. the group decides to head to Rei's house first to try to find her mother before making their way to the school. We then cut to an SDF naval vessel where one of the sailors mentions that Minami plans to go into the city. Then we see Shintoku Elementary, where one of the officers there calls out to Rei's father to come inspect an arrival of newcomers for any bites. These newcomers being Shido's group. The teens stop by a convenience store to stock up on supplies, and they make it into Rei and Takashi's neighborhood. As a grim storm sets in, Psycho asks Rei and Takashi if they'll be able to take down any zombies that were once people they knew. Psycho's then proven right, as he and Rei are unable to shoot one of their neighbors that they recognize. They hear shouting in the distance, and Rei thinks she recognizes the voice. To their surprise, they find Rei's mother outside of a makeshift wall. After a tearful reunion between her and Rei, she goes on to explain that the group she was in recently took in a strange man, and now they refuse to let her back in after going on a supply run. The group tries to explain to the survivors on the other side of the wall that they need to get to Shintoku for the evacuation, but they refuse to believe them. With that, the group heads deeper into the city to get to the school before the evacuation starts. So why did it take 2 whole years between the release of chapter 29 and 30? One thing I haven't spoken about yet is that the manga's production was constantly plagued with hiatuses. It went on hiatus from 2008 to 2010, and again from 2011 to 2013. This was because at the time, the author Daisuke Sato was suffering from heart disease that made it increasingly difficult for him to continue the series. And unfortunately, in 2017, that disease finally took his life. The artist Shoji Sato decided that it was best to end the series because nobody else could fill the shoes his dear friend had left behind. Now, let's move on to the last chapter of Highschool of the Dead. The chapter begins back at Shintoku, where we see a police sniper shooting down zombies outside of the school's perimeter. He's never named in this chapter, but I think he's likely supposed to be Rei's father. The survivors at the school are beginning to turn on each other and are about to kill a man who they think has been bitten. He says it's only a scratch, but they refuse to listen. Before they can attack him though, the unnamed officer comes in and eases the dispute. We're taken back to the SDF fleet, where the officers on one of the submarines discuss the evacuation plan. With the looming threat of Chinese subs approaching, they come to the conclusion that they won't have enough time to rescue every single person at Shintoku. Minami, overhearing this, volunteers to be left behind there to protect the remaining survivors. She's granted permission to do so, and is allowed to take as many weapons as she can carry. We're then taken back to our main cast as they continue making their way to the school, shooting down any zombies they find in the pouring rain. The unnamed officer hears their shots in the distance and questions if it's the SDF. The final panel depicts an unknown woman, stating that the SDF's weapons don't sound like that. So overall, what did I think about the series? Honestly, it's not really good at all. The entire series is pretty much just softcore hentai about teenagers, and it blows my mind that this was published in a shonen magazine. I've read seinen less explicit than this. I'm also not a fan of Shoji Sato's art style. The early to mid chapters looks a little too generic and crude for my liking. Our main character Takashi is not only not a likable protagonist, but I also find him to be pretty boring. I will say, however, that Shoji's art style in chapter 30 was a significant improvement compared to the rest of the series. Almost night and day. I would have been interested to see where the story could have gone, as I feel like it was just starting to find its footing. It's unfortunate that we'll never get to see what could have been, but if the manga was such a mediocre product, then why was it the talk of the town in the early 2010s? Well, yeah, when this anime dropped, it blew whatever the manga had done to that point out of the water. I'm mostly a manga reader and I don't watch too much anime, but this is one of the few series where I would recommend you watch the anime instead of reading the manga. The opening is an absolute banger, the animation is gorgeous, and I'd even say better than some anime that comes out nowadays. The vibrant colors and bloody visuals are so captivating. It truly elevates the story and actually makes it feel worth investing your time into. And why wouldn't it be? It was animated by legendary studio Madhouse after all, and directed by the genius Tetsuro Araki, the same man who directed Death Note and Attack on Titan. There's no better man to bring this story to life than him, and it's no surprise that everyone was talking about this anime when it premiered. The way they produced the scene of Alice crying over her father's death genuinely tugged on my heartstrings. While the anime only lasted for one season and covered the first arc, it's still worth the watch because of how beautifully put together it is. But wait, there's one more piece of media we haven't talked about yet. Included in the Blu-ray release of the series was a 14-minute long OVA called Drifters of the Dead that takes place right after the end of the first season. In this OVA, they make their way to a small island right off the shore to escape from the zombies. They start a fire utilizing some of the nearby vegetation. Little do they know that they are burning a hallucinogenic that causes them to have intense hallucinations all night long. Now, I can't show most of these scenes because it just pretty much is hentai. Rei and Saiko make out, each thinking that the other one is Takashi. Takashi sneaks off with who he thinks is Saiko to sleep with, only to be found in the morning by the rest of the group, wrestling away zombies in his sleep. So, unless you're amongst the most degenerate of gooners, I would recommend just skipping it over. All in all, I always find it sad when a creator's work is left unfinished. And if there's anything to take away from this, it's that High School of the Dead will forever cement itself as the legacy of Daisuke Sato. Thanks for making it to the end. I'm really glad that you're here. I was trying to get this video out by Halloween, but as you can see, I definitely missed the mark. It ended up taking a lot longer than I expected, and I also just got a new job, so I'm still readjusting to my new schedule. But anyway, if you enjoyed what you saw, drop a like and share it with a friend. Let me know in the comments below what you want to see me talk about next, and subscribe to see more of my videos. Until then, I hope you have a great day and happy reading.